Have you ever noticed how the most transformative moments in life rarely happen when everything is safe and predictable? Growth almost always begins with disruption, leaving something familiar, enduring something difficult, or seeing something so illuminating that you can't go back to where you were before. But the real question is this: what do you do after that moment passes? Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the second Sunday of Lent, we'll explore the arc of human responsibility, from leaving the comfort of inherited beliefs to enduring hardship for a larger purpose, to bringing our highest insights back down into the everyday struggles of the world. In this episode, we're asking a tough question. Are we using our growth to serve others, or are we building comfortable tents to protect our own enlightenment while the world waits below? So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the second Sunday of Lent, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't require belief in the supernatural. These texts were written by pre-scientific people, shaped by their own cultures, needs, and agendas, not as history books or scientific manuals, but as meaning-making stories for their communities. And just like believers approach these writings through the lens of faith, I approach them through a more humanistic lens, one grounded in the idea that certain foundational values helped humans evolve and flourish. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, or you might find something completely different. That's the beauty of treating these writings as sacred myth. We're free to negotiate with the text and discover whatever insights we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the second Sunday of Lent, Cycle A. Our first reading is from the book of Genesis. It's chapter 12, verses 1 through 4a. Our second reading is from 2 Timothy. It's chapter 1, verses 8b through 10. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. It's chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from Genesis. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household, to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. Our second reading is from 2 Timothy. Beloved, join with me in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. He has saved us and called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of His own purpose and grace. This grace was given us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time, but it has now been revealed through the appearing of our Savior, Christ Jesus, who has destroyed death and has brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from the book of Genesis. And when we strip away the supernatural framing, this reads less like a divine command and more like a universal human moment. The decision to leave what is familiar. Leaving your father's house is a powerful metaphor. It represents inherited beliefs, cultural expectations, tribal loyalties, even the comfortable identity we didn't choose but simply received. Every mature human being eventually faces this crossroads. Do we stay inside the walls that were built for us? Or do we step into the uncertainty of self-authored growth? Progress, personal or societal, progress always begins when someone is willing to walk away from unquestioned assumptions and they're willing to explore what lies beyond them. The journey toward an unknown land, well, it can feel reckless, but from a humanist perspective, it is the birthplace of autonomy. You don't wait for permission. You don't wait for perfect clarity. You move. The call in this story can be understood as the internal stirring of curiosity and responsibility. The realization that staying still is its own kind of risk. Growth demands courage. It demands sacrifice. Not in the sense of religious ritual, but in the sense of prioritization. You give up immediate ease and comfort in order to build something more meaningful. That's how maturity works. That's how civilizations advance. Exploration, resilience, course correction. These aren't acts of blind faith. These are acts of human agency. And then there's the promise of becoming a blessing. Traditionally, that language has been read as divine favoritism. But there's a deeper ethical layer here. The arc of this story pushes outward from one person to a family to all the families of the earth. That widening circle matters. A humanist interpretation hears a call to move beyond narrow tribal identity toward a more global responsibility. Success isn't meant to terminate on the self. That's not where it stops. Flourishing isn't meant to just stay local. The highest expression of growth is contribution to something beyond ourselves, something greater than ourselves. You become truly mature, not when you accumulate status and wealth, but when your actions improve the lives of others, especially those outside of your immediate circle. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that growth begins when we leave inherited comfort behind and choose to become a blessing to the wider human family. This story isn't ultimately about ancient geography. It's about the human transition from passive inheritance to active responsibility. Leaving the Father's household symbolizes stepping beyond dogma and comfort into self-determination and growth. The unknown becomes opportunity. And the goal isn't personal glory. The goal is to live in a way that others benefit from your courage. Growth begins when we leave inherited comfort behind and choose to become a blessing to the wider human family. Our second reading was from 2 Timothy. And in this passage, the language is heavy with themes of suffering and calling and even the abolition of death. But if we move past the supernatural framing, what we're left with is something that, again, is deeply human. And that's the reality that living with conviction costs something. To share in suffering isn't about religious martyrdom. It's about the simple truth that integrity often invites resistance. Standing up for fairness, telling the truth when it's inconvenient, refusing to participate in cruelty, these choices can isolate us. But the burden changes when it's shared. Community transforms hardship into solidarity. We endure more when we know we are not alone. That's how ethical movements survive. That's how social progress happens. The text also speaks of a calling rooted in purpose rather than in performance. All right, stripped of theology, that's a powerful idea. You are not defined by your resume, your status, or certainly not your failures. Your worth is not a scoreboard. Your worth emerges from the direction you choose to orient your life. A humanist reading sees this as a reminder that meaning is constructed. It's not bestowed upon us from above. Purpose isn't handed down from the heavens. Purpose is discovered through reflection and commitment. And when you anchor your life to something larger than your own comfort, something like justice, compassion, or truth, when you do that, you become steadier. You're less reactive. You're less fragile. You know why you're doing what you're doing, and that's huge. Then there's the dramatic claim that death has been abolished. All right, taken literally, that's mythology. But metaphorically, it points to something very real. The fear of death can paralyze us. Especially as we get older, it can make us small, cautious, self-protective. But when we recognize that our actions ripple outward, that our ideas, kindness, and courage influence others long after we're gone, the power of death diminishes. Legacy becomes a form of secular immortality. Every teacher who inspires, every mentor who models integrity, every ordinary person who chooses compassion over apathy extends their influence far beyond their own lifespan. We don't conquer death by denying it. We transcend it by contributing to something that continues without us. Anyway, the main lesson I got from our second reading is that courage grows when we stop fearing the end and start living for a purpose that outlives us. This passage, read through a human lens, is not about supernatural rescue. It's about moral resilience. It reminds us that conviction will sometimes cost us, that purpose defines us more than pedigree, and that mortality loses its sting when our lives are invested in the common good. When we dedicate ourselves to values that endure, truth, empathy, justice, we participate in something so much larger than our own small, short lifespan. Courage grows when we stop fearing the end and start living for a purpose that outlives us. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Matthew. And the Transfiguration is a dazzling scene. Radiant light, revered figures from the past, and a voice from the heavens. But if we step back from this supernatural imagery, what we see is a powerful metaphor for human transformation. The radiance can represent those moments in life when something clicks, those aha moments, when we drop outdated assumptions, confront our blind spots, and step more fully into who we are capable of becoming. Real growth often feels luminous. It feels clarifying. It's the moment when our values align with our actions, and that kind of internal transformation, intellectual honesty, moral courage, emotional maturity, internal transformation like that, it's not divine magic. It's human potential realized. The presence of Moses and Elijah, symbols of law and prophetic challenge, well, they remind us that transformation doesn't happen in a vacuum. We inherit stories, wisdom, cautionary tales, and ethical frameworks from the people who came before us. A humanist approach doesn't discard the past. It engages with it critically. We study history, philosophy, science, and culture, not to be trapped by those things, but to synthesize whatever is useful and discard whatever is harmful. Enlightenment is cumulative. It builds on what humanity has already learned. Curiosity becomes a moral virtue here. We ask better questions. We refine our understanding. And we allow insight to evolve rather than ossify into dogma. But then comes the crucial turn. Peter wants to stay on the mountain. He wants to build shelters and preserve the moment. Let's put up 3 tents. And that impulse is deeply human. When we experience clarity through study, meditation, retreat, therapy, art, whatever it is, we often want to stay right there. It feels safe, elevated, separated from the mess of life. But the story refuses to end on the mountaintop. They have to come down. The light isn't for display, it's preparation. Any insight that doesn't translate into service is incomplete. The real test of transformation isn't how inspired we feel in the solitude of the mountain. It's how we show up down in the valley. It's how we show up in difficult conversations, in community conflict, in acts of fairness and empathy when it would be easier to disengage and look the other way. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that enlightenment matters only when it returns from the mountaintop to serve the valley. This story, stripped of all its spectacle, becomes a reminder that insight is just a beginning, not a destination. We grow, we learn, we experience moments of profound clarity, but the purpose of that clarity isn't escape. It's contribution. We study the past, refine our character, overcome fear through connection, and then we bring what we've learned back to the world that needs it. Enlightenment matters only when it returns from the mountaintop to serve the valley. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from Genesis, the main lesson I came away with was growth begins when we leave inherited comfort behind and choose to become a blessing to the wider human family. In our second reading from 2 Timothy, the main lesson I got was courage grows when we stop fearing the end and start living for a purpose that outlives us. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was enlightenment matters only when it returns from the mountaintop to serve the valley. When you line these 3 stories up sort of side by side, they read less like disconnected religious episodes and more like a blueprint for becoming a fully responsible human being. First, you have the courage to step away from what's familiar, to question the inherited scripts, the tribal loyalties, the assumptions you never really chose for yourself. Then you discover that freedom isn't easy. Once you've claimed your autonomy, you have to decide what you're going to stand for, especially when it costs you something. Purpose becomes your anchor. And finally, whatever clarity or growth you gain isn't meant to make you superior or separate. It's meant to be useful. Insight has to come back down the mountain and serve real people in real situations. Put it all together and the message is clear. Maturity isn't passive. Maturity asks you to leave what no longer serves you, endure for something bigger than yourself, and turn your personal transformation into tangible good for the world. That is the heroic responsibility of the self. And it's available to every single one of us, whether we believe in God or not. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I will try to answer two questions. So what? And now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because these lessons confront one of the biggest problems of our time, the shrinking of our moral imagination. It's incredibly easy to care only about people who look like us, vote like us, worship like us, or agree with us. But growth begins when we step outside our inherited circles. Leaving the Father's household isn't just an ancient metaphor. It's about breaking out of echo chambers and tribal loyalty. If we want a stable, humane future, we have to expand our concern beyond our own group and become a benefit to people we may never fully understand. We should care because life is hard right now, and pretending it isn't doesn't help. Anxiety, burnout, cynicism, they're everywhere. These lessons offer a grounded, secular way to endure. Hardship isn't a cosmic punishment, and it's not proof that you're failing. It's part of being human. What sustains us isn't magical thinking. What sustains us is purpose. When you attach your life to something larger than your own comfort, when you think in terms of legacy instead of applause, when you do that, you build stamina. You keep going, not because it's easy, but because it matters. We should care because insight without service is just self-absorption. We live in a culture that prizes optimization, self-help, productivity hacks, retreats, certifications. None of that is wrong, but if your growth never leaves the mountaintop, it becomes a form of isolation. Knowledge has an ethical obligation attached to it. If you've learned something that can reduce suffering, improve understanding, or strengthen cooperation, then the real test is whether you bring it back down into your relationships, your workplace, your neighborhood. Growth that never serves anyone else eventually collapses into ego. And finally, we should care because this perspective restores our agency. It reminds us that we are not waiting for permission. We are not spectators hoping history fixes itself. We are participants. We can choose to step forward. We can choose to endure with purpose. We can choose to translate insight into action. That shift from passive observer to responsible actor changes everything. It means the future is not something that merely happens to us. The future is something we help shape. And we help shape it one deliberate decision at a time. And the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Well, when something finally starts going well in our lives, And when we've built a little stability, gained some insight, we achieved a certain measure of success, our first instinct is almost always the same. Protect it. We want to freeze the moment. We want to build a structure around it. We want to stay where it feels clear and elevated. That instinct that we saw in our gospel reading is deeply human. But it's also where stagnation begins. So with that in mind, and remembering what Jesus told Peter not to do, here's your question for the week. What tent am I currently trying to build to stay comfortable, and what valley is my growth actually calling me to serve? That question matters because it cuts straight to the most common reflex we have. The reflex to stop moving once we feel safe. In the Transfiguration story, Peter's instinct was to build shelters and stay on the mountain. Don't descend. Don't risk losing this clarity. Don't re-enter the mess. And we do the same thing all the time. Maybe your tent is your professional success. You've climbed to a stable place, and now you're just maintaining. Maybe it's your intellectual comfort zone. You've read enough to feel informed, but you're not applying it anywhere. Maybe it's emotional safety. You've healed enough to function, but you're avoiding deeper vulnerability. Whatever it is, the tent feels secure. But security can quietly become stagnation. This question forces honesty about comfort. It helps you identify the modern version of the father's household, the inherited assumptions, the familiar routines, the echo chambers that feel safe but limit your growth. It asks whether you are choosing predictability over responsibility. And that's not an accusation. If anything, it's an invitation, because once you can name the tent, you can decide whether it's a shelter or if it's really turning into a cage. And then there's the valley. The valley is where the need is. The valley is where your skills, your education, your therapy, your insight, your stability, the valley is where all of those actually matter. It doesn't need to be anything overly grand. If you've gained patience, where is patience needed? If you've gained some measure of financial stability, where could a little generosity make a difference? If you've gained knowledge, who needs mentorship? The mountaintop isn't the destination. The mountaintop is the preparation. The real test of growth is output. What are you producing for the world because of what you've learned? What are you doing down in the valley? For me, my tent was the Catholic Church and my position as the director of youth ministry at our parish. It was comfortable. It was safe. I got to do work with teens and young adults, something I enjoyed and had been doing for decades and was really good at. And even though I had personally stopped believing, I could still talk the talk. I figured out how to teach the teens how to live values-based lives while framing it with just enough Jesus speak to keep anyone from guessing that I was no longer picking up what the Catholic Church was laying down. I finally made the decision to retire from youth ministry and leave the church. But I had learned so much over the years about morality, ethics, and values that I didn't simply create a different tent. I went into the valley by starting the Coda Project. Now I do weekly live streams, podcasts, and blog posts that all focus on various aspects of living a values-based life. I try hard not to pontificate. I try to give you something to do with the ideas I'm sharing. That's why every week I give you a challenge to take or a question to answer. And that question this week is, what tent am I currently trying to build to stay comfortable? And what valley is my growth actually calling me to serve? This question shifts everything from belief to behavior. It's not asking what you agree with. It's asking where you need to show up. It turns ancient stories into a diagnostic tool for integrity, because the secular humanist path, the path of reason, responsibility, and integrity, is not about staying enlightened. It's about becoming useful. So take some time this week. Think about the question and take action once you have an answer. Where are you building a tent? And where is life calling you down into the valley? That's where the work is. And that's where growth becomes meaningful. Well, before I wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with a quote that captures this tension perfectly. The tension between staying comfortable in the tent and stepping into the valley where you're needed. American author and philosopher Howard Thurman once said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Now that is on point. Notice the phrase, what makes you come alive? That's the mountaintop. That's the transfiguration moment, the spark. It's the clarity you feel when you're aligned with your values, your strengths, your curiosity, your sense of meaning. Without that internal fire, you don't have anything sustainable to offer. Service without vitality turns into resentment. Activism without inner alignment turns into burnout. Thurman is acknowledging something deeply human. You need to know what lights you up. You need to know where your energy and conviction are the strongest. But then comes the second half, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. Go do it. That's the departure. That's Abram leaving the familiar. That's stepping off the mountaintop. It's not enough to sit around talking about what makes you feel inspired. It's not enough to read about it, journal about it, or build an identity around it. You have to carry it somewhere. You have to put it in motion. Go implies risk. It implies disruption. It implies that you can't stay where it's easy. And this is the subtle rejection of the tent. The purpose of coming alive isn't to build a shelter around your comfort. It isn't to protect your insight. It isn't to curate a life where you only ever feel elevated. The fire inside you isn't meant to keep you warm in isolation. It's meant to power your work out in the world. Thurman bridges self-actualization and responsibility. He's saying your vitality is not selfish. It's necessary, but it only fulfills its purpose when it meets a real human need. Now think about that in light of the question we just asked. What tent am I building to stay comfortable, and what valley is my growth actually calling me to serve? Thurman gives you the compass. What makes you come alive? That's your mountaintop clarity. That's your insight. But where are you taking it? Where is it needed? Who benefits because you are alive in that way? This is where the secular path becomes extremely practical. You don't need divine permission. You don't need a supernatural calling. You need honesty about what energizes you, and then you need the courage to carry it down into the messy, imperfect valley where real people live. The world doesn't need more spectators. It doesn't need more carefully constructed tents. It needs people who have come alive and who are willing to move. So this week, when you answer the question, don't just identify your tent. Identify your fire. And then ask yourself very directly, where am I going to take it? That's the work. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week, but in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week and pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the second Sunday of Lent, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that maturity isn't passive. It asks you to leave what no longer serves you, endure for something bigger than yourself, and turn your personal transformation into tangible good for the world. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, and 2011 by Biblica Inc., used by permission, all rights reserved, worldwide. Thank you again for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find the podcast at thecodaproject.com or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Pocket Casts. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.